Good morning. I'm Mike Mitchell. I'm a senior manager of trends and insights at Lowe's Home Improvement, and I study trends, foresight, and brand reputation. That's all long form and fancy way to say that I'm in the science of roughly right. It's a lot like my marriage. It's my joke. I'm running that one. Don't tell my wife. Anyway, but you know, marriage is never perfect anyway. But I do work in the science of roughly right. And the reason why I say that very deliberately is that we need to work with speed at Lowe's. We're in a new era. The reality is if we wait for exactly right, it's often too late. And I say that pretty deliberately because we understand what that first wave of big box retail looks like. And you read enough headlines out there to know where it's headed. And a lot of our peers out there are suffering while Lowe's is thriving. And what we've learned is that the way that we understand retail is that it took a long time to get here. It was only just 2 years ago, though, that Sports Authority was among the top sports retailers in the world. Now it's gone. We don't want to be a part of that wave. The metaphor I like to think about it, how we got here and the way that we're going to get forward is about the Chinese bamboo tree. Now, if you study the Chinese bamboo tree, it's a really hard nut. It takes a long time to grow. You have to plant it in soil. And it takes 3, 4, most likely 5 years to grow. You have to constantly fertilize and water. And it almost never comes out of the ground until the 5th year. Now in that 5th year, within 5 weeks, it grows 90 feet. So of course, the metaphor is, did it grow in 5 weeks or did it grow in 5 years? And that's the reason why our leadership is starting to ask us to answer some very challenging questions. And while you'll hear about some of the things that we're trying to study and understand the retail environment, we want to understand what that next wave looks like. So as we start to plant some of those bamboo trees and start to water and fertilize and understand how we're going to be the omni-channel retailer of the future, right now we're trying to make sense of the environment for the consumer first and for the market space second. So we'll tell you 3 stories. They're really short, and I'll start with mine because I got to pick first, and I'm standing up here. My peers didn't want to be in the spotlight as long as I'm going to be. But the point is that our leadership started to understand and ask questions, when will the millennials take over the home improvement market? So we took some quantitative data from various secondary sources, and we took some liberties with the data, and we saw that it was much further out than we anticipated. It's about 2030 when half of the market will be owned by millennials. This means baby boomers are going to continue to spend and push the housing market. But what was important about that, and as you understand apparel or look at retail all across, people's values are changing. You heard Jay Walker Thompson talking about materialism's kind of a past era. We don't disagree, but the one thing that people still value is owning a home. 75% of millennials still want to own a home. But the question is, will the world look the same by 2030 when half this market takes over? Absolutely not. So how do you get there? How do you have a perspective of the year of 2030 in retail? Can you do it through a conjoint or a max diff? No, obviously not. So we asked our leadership to continue to allow some liberties to work with roughly right data so we could be smart and bring very deliberate answers. So this was a journey where we leveraged our internal experts, but I had to turn outward to stylist innovation. And what was rich about this is they have their hands on the fingertips of global retail, all across the world, what's innovating and what's surviving and what's even thriving. So I'll have Amber talk to you a little bit about their methodology and their approach and how they helped us along this journey.
Test, test? Oh, good, excellent. So my name is Amber Davis. I'm an advisory strategist with Stylists based in New York, although our main office is in the UK. Let me make sure I'm doing this right. So Stylists is an innovation and advisory firm. We work across categories. We have correspondents all over the world who are feeding us information, and we have great content experts working in specific verticals, as well as strategists who are kind of looking at things across industry, and that's more or less what I do. So Stylist Advisory, which is the kind of consulting arm and bespoke innovation service of Stylist Media Group, and that's the kind of partnership that we had with Lowe's. What we do is we bring together kind of the best of Stylists' syndicated content, independent research that we do on our own that's kind of tailored to whatever problem we're trying to solve for a client, as well as all of the benefits of a consultancy. So that's how you get that dark space in the Venn diagram. That's where Stylist Advisory really lives. So to break this down a little bit further and talk about our methodology, we first identify key existing research, and that can come from a lot of sources. And then we connect that to, plosive mic. We connect that to trends across industries, and that's really where we tend to excel. Because consumers don't live siloed lives. They don't just think about what they're doing in your category. You have to kind of compete with experiences that they're having elsewhere. There's that old adage, you can put a man on the moon, but you can't fill in the blank. That had nothing to do with the idea that NASA should have solved the problem of getting a mattress home to your house very easily en route to putting a man on the moon. It's just the idea that when people see convenience and possibility and opportunity in one space, they start to question, why can't I have that here as well? So you're competing with every kind of experience that a consumer is having, not just the one that they have in your store, not just the one that they have with your brand. And that's one of the reasons why we think kind of looking cross-industry is particularly important. But on top of that, from the brand and product side, obviously things that are happening in food end up affecting things that happen in beauty. There are things that happen in home design that end up driving desires in the automotive space. So if you aren't looking at the entire ecosystem, you can sometimes miss opportunities and miss things that are coming on the horizon, even if they haven't landed in your category yet. That's one of the big, powerful aspects of just kind of trends in general. So that's how we kind of connect. And then we customize all of that information according to the specific needs of the client in order to do that bespoke work. And that means looking at their regional focus. That means looking at kind of how far out they're looking, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, or whether they're looking at things that are happening right now and just trying to understand a shift in the market that they may not have anticipated. So we kind of use two layered methodologies in order to drive this work. First, we go at it with STEEP, and that's something that I'm sure a lot of you have seen, heard about, and probably use, because it's kind of the basics. And STEEP is for the social, technological, economic, environmental, and political forces that may be shaping macro trends, shaping the parameters within which our consumers are making decisions. They're kind of things that can't be escaped, and also things that you need to keep in mind when you're looking at, especially very forward-looking things that are happening in the market. So, for example, I had a client who they make speakers and sound systems for cars, for home, for on the go. Their question is, what's going to happen to the interior of the car when we get into the driverless space? Or what's going to happen to the car when car ownership continues to go down and we're all sharing them? So in order to do that, I kind of looked at wellness, healthcare, productivity, changing family dynamics. These are all things that could potentially affect what happens inside of the car, and then tie that directly back to what does that mean for sound, for example. But you can get at problems like that from a variety of perspectives, but where that question came from is looking at those social and technological and economic and environmental and political issues, and then arriving at that question. So we layer that with what we call Next, and you can see that in the center, and that's in for our global network of experts. So for example, I did a project, I don't only do car things, but for a German automaker that wanted to learn more about AR and how AR may affect how people are driving, what the windshield looks like. So I tapped into a correspondent who's based in Silicon Valley and already had relationships with different research organizations, different incubators and startups, and was also just eavesdropping on conversations at the Battery, and was able to feed us a lot of great information that we would not have been able to find if we didn't have boots on the ground. So that's another benefit of having that network of experts. And E is for evidence based on secondary data sources and sometimes primary data. And then X, again, for that cross-industry lens, which is very important. Oops, forgot these move. And then finally, T for our team of in-house experts, and that's people like me who try to bring this all together and synthesize in a way with kind of powerful and deep analysis. So, on to the future of retail, and this is the area that we looked at for Lowe's. But what I'm going to show you today is if Lowe's came to us with this problem right now, these are probably some of the things that we would be talking about and thinking about. I'm going to run through them relatively quickly, because I know we're short on time. And also, quite a few of these things, if you haven't been over to the Ponce City Market, you can see a lot of the things I'm going to discuss here in action there. I mean, it's all over the place. And it's a great way to experience a space that's doing well in retail and that's trying a lot of very innovative, kind of out-of-the-box ideas in order to do so. So first up, we have brand reach and chat. We're seeing, or we actually saw a few years ago in Asia, a lot more commercial platforms partnering with chat apps like WhatsApp in order to kind of change that behavior and build kind of purchasing within a social space. And now you even have basically commerce platforms that are mimicking the interface and the look and the behaviors that are happening around things like WhatsApp. And this is an example from Sweden, the commerce app Ticktail, and it kind of has that social mechanism built in. The interface is a little bit more playful. You can layer things on top of each other. It's trying to borrow some of that share and building in that social aspect with the commercial and the retail. And then bridging in-store and mobile, we know that consumers enter the store with their smartphone. They're using it to help make decisions right there in the space. So every retail store is also, in a sense, an online shop. And these are two examples. One is a little bit more three-dimensional and a little bit further out there, and that's Shop With Me, which is basically a pop-up, super interactive and immersive retail concept. So it has things like beacons for getting more information about an individual item. It has virtual dressing rooms. It has this three-dimensional scanner that will give you kind of everything you probably don't want to know about your body and your size in order to make sure that you're making the right purchases. And then on top of that, it has these shelving units that will push items towards you based on your recommendations and preferences as you pass along. And so each shopper is having a kind of individuated retail experience that's tied into some of their purchasing behaviors and some of their activity online. Some people may find this creepy, but I think that increasingly with people sharing more information and being willing to give up more information for tighter and kind of more tailored recommendations, it's just going to become par for the course. And the other example is a little bit more two-dimensional. It's from Barneys. They have an app which you can shop through, et cetera, but when you enter their new New York flagship, it also pushes recommendations based on your browsing and kind of purchasing history. It points out things that you may be interested in the physical store, and it also provides you with content from their actually really lovely blog vertical called The Window, which has stuff not just about fashion and the things you can buy in-house, but also about kind of art and culture events that are happening in the city. So these are ways to sort of activate and turn on the retail space using digital as a tool to do that. So Under Armour has been testing out, and they did this in their store in China, the idea of 80-20 retail, and that's 80% narrative and storytelling and experience, and then 20% about actually driving commercial purchase in store. So in this particular example, consumers are kind of channeled into this dark chamber where you then watch a video that's kind of a dramatization of the kind of performance, lifestyle, things that are on offer on the other side, and the designing architects talked about it as resetting the consumer kind of psychically before they go in to make that purchasing decision. So it's kind of the concept, the psychological concept of priming in an aesthetic way. So it's almost you enter into another world, and on the other side, you're met with all of these items that could help you fulfill the goal of swimming like Michael Phelps, but not really, obviously. But the idea is also not just to drive commerce in the store, but also to inspire and to tell you something about the brand that will make you want to stay connected with them when you're making that online purchase. So it's really changing the way that we think about retail spaces as not always having to directly connect to converting dollar per square foot, that there are other ways to count the success of a physical store. And that brings us to Nike, which has really taken this to another level with offering a lot of these off-piste experiences that are really about self-discovery. Including they just launched in their Soho store in New York, like one-on-one shopping experiences, which is really interesting and something that you usually only get at higher end. But this is an example from London last year where they had this 3-day immersive fitness experience in this really interesting and beautiful space that was kind of kitted out with kind of transformative lighting installations. So they offered classes, and they also had some of those classes were kind of serenaded by the music of Hot Chip, accompanied by an orchestra. And it's just these fully immersive theatrical experiences, these long-term events that consumers are starting to expect, not just in-store, but off-site, and that kind of Nike has been at the forefront of that. And a lot of people are watching what they're doing in order to see how they can replicate that in their own category. And then finally, my last example is kind of transumer retail and in-store pop-ups. We've seen this a lot more if you've ridden the subway or a metro in a number of cities. The transformation of the kiosk into not just a place for leftovers, but a place for a curated shopping experience, and one that's often tailored to real-time needs. The example on the left is from projects, and what they did was they created this kind of flexible magnetic-based modular system that would allow you to basically drop down really interesting and kind of aesthetically rich retail experiences wherever. There's one at the subway station in Union Square in New York, and what they do is they change over product depending on even what's happening that day. So if it turns out it's raining, suddenly they have umbrellas there. But you can also buy higher end items. You can buy like Moleskine notebooks. It's not just gum and chips and the kinds of things you find in those spaces. So it's really transforming that kind of kind of convenient shopping into something that's a little bit more rich and impactful. And the other example is from Dover Street Market, who's really excelled at this, of creating small kiosk spaces that just go far beyond kind of the kiosks that we remember from 80s and 90s malls into kind of a station where you can create something from a luxury kind of brand that they've partnered with. And even their spaces in general are kind of capsule areas that are highly designed and that offer kind of a multi-layered shopping experience. And we're seeing with these micro stores that they are growing at 5% versus 2% for a lot of the larger retailers. So it's something that even larger retailers are thinking about dropping into their spaces in order to keep offering consumers something new, something interesting, in order to keep them coming in store, because it's almost like that digital experience of having things pushed at you continuously and having surprises kind of show up. And that's sort of it, but just to remind, we identify, connect, customize, and deliver. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Mike.
Thank you. So one of the key, this was a 3-month sprint project, and we delivered it in the summer of last year. And one of the key insights that we found was that Lowe's, and maybe general retail, needs to invent trips, store trips. But store trips doesn't actually mean just to our brick and mortar. How else are we going to connect with them digitally and analog? As you can see some of these insights, they drove across the organization and actually went far better than I ever realized. When I showed up at Lowe's about 3.5 years ago, a lot of my content, as I mentioned, was roughly right, and it continues to be so, leveraging all the thought partners I have externally and internally. But they got very comfortable with this idea. Before it was, please don't shoot this out to every part of the organization. We don't want to create distraction and confuse people. When this project was rolled out, it was go and tell everyone. And almost literally, we counted informally. My colleague and I communicated some of this research, and we built some discrete futures out of this to about 2,000 to 3,000 corporate employees at our various campuses. We actually traveled to different parts of the country, flown across to share it with them. In fact, our strategy team actually wanted these stories to be, as you can see in the bottom corners, to be in front of our board of directors to help them understand what the next wave looks like. So while we used our imagination to help drive strategy, the fundamental thing that I like to say that I took away from all this, it wasn't just about shaping the strategy. It was letting the culture of foresight be embedded into the organization and letting leadership push other business units to be comfortable with that kind of information. So with that, that's what we have. Any questions?